barriers that women face. And with that, of course, come opportunities. But it's important that we're having this conversation because there is a strategic imperative for women to be part of these processes in order to ensure that political processes, negotiations, and mediation efforts are more inclusive. And as we will hear from our panelists, there are many benefits that they will highlight. So please join me in welcoming our panelists, Leia Baroudi, who is the founder and director of March Mediterranean Women Mediators Network, Ambassador and Dr. Daria Bavdaz-Kuret, who is Ambassador at Large at the Slovenian Ministry of Foreign and European Affairs, Dr. Lara Scarpita, Senior Advisor on Gender Issues at OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation for Europe, Alain Deletreau, Director General of Geneva Call, and last but not least, Sana Keskitalo, who is Senior Manager at the Finland-based CMI, the Martti Ahtisaari Peace Foundation. So thank you all for your time today. Dr. Scarpita, I want to start with you because we've already talked about the challenges that many women face to be part of these mediation efforts, especially in countries and in conflict. You and I talked about also opportunities. So what are some of these challenges and how can you turn them into opportunities?
Thank you very much for your question. And I'm pleased to be able to join today this conversation. For the OEC. Women inclusion in peace and mediation is very much a priority, and we're also working very closely with the Med partners to implement the double peace and security agenda. I mean, speaking of challenges or opportunities, I mean, we will hear from other colleagues as to why we need to bring women at the table. Frankly, just a step back, for me, it's also a question that we don't have to forget. It's also a question of rights. So women do have the right to be at the table. We don't have to justify why they have to be there, although they bring a great wealth of expertise, because we do represent 50% of the population. So we also have to remember this. Now, going back to the obstacles of the reason why women are excluded. From my experience, also working in countries, also in the Med region, in the MENA region, there are many challenges, but I think two are particularly important and critical. One of them is access, and the second one is recognition. Access is crucial. Today, women don't have access to the peace tables. I mean, the numbers speak quite clearly. Latest figures, 10% of women are today mediators, negotiators. So in peace processes, some of them like Yemen and Libya, you have 0 women in negotiating delegation, and access is what is really blocking women from making a difference and bringing gender to the table. And it's not just a question of gender, it's also a question of power. Giving up the chair is something which is very difficult to do. But of course, the lack of access, the lack of inclusivity also undermines the credibility, the sustainability of any agreement that is reached. The second obstacle is recognition. Women, it's known across the world, they do play great role in peace building. They are frontline humanitarians in conflict, but the role, or they work on supporting survivors of conflict-related sexual violence, like we've seen in Ukraine or we've seen in other conflict, but they are mostly invisible. Their role is not recognized. Now, the picture is still bleak because I mentioned some of the figures, but in terms of opportunities, I think we are right now in a rather unique opportunity, which is the spotlight is on the 25th anniversary of UN Security Council Resolution 1325. This is really a big opportunity to renew international effort and to really find new creative ways to push for women inclusion. I mean, we're working a lot with networks, We are working a lot with Women Mediators Networks. We are working extensively with local peace builders on the ground. These are all concrete actions that, with more attention, at least from the OEC perspective, will be put in the context of the 2020 25th anniversary next year.
Thank you for that. And Leah, if I can turn to you, because you have hands-on experience working in the field with a lot of women leaders. And of course, as Dr. Scarpizza mentioned, and mentioned earlier, we have to do this to ensure gender equality. That's a very noble and important goal. But why else is it important to include women at the table?
Thank you, Marisa. Yes, my work, I'm a practitioner, so I work in the field, and to prove why it is important, I'm going to give one example of my work in the field, which happens in Lebanon, and particularly in Tripoli, which is in the north of Lebanon, and it's a city that has known recently rounds of sectarian clashes, like a mini civil war happening between two communities, one Sunni community and one Alawite community. Very large neighborhoods that have been going on at a war that is political and sectarian for years because of their proximity and because of the fact that they both relate to what's happening in Syria. In addition to that, the conflicts has also transformed into an ideological conflict, because also a lot of these young men started crossing the borders to fight with extremist groups, whether it is ISIS or Al-Nusra Front, or even on the side of the regime, or even fighting in Iraq or in Afghanistan. When I decided that as a mediator, I wanted to try and reconcile these communities using theater first and the power of storytelling, I was obviously extremely discouraged because a lot of people believed that it was already a conflict that was hopeless, because people who are ideological, there is no hope for actually rationalizing with them. And second, because also the fact that I was a woman and that I was not even from their own religion, I heard a lot of people say, how are we going to talk to a Daesh fighter? We need, figures of authority and religion to convince them to, etc. I'm not going to hide that the first year or so to get access to these young men, because I decided on my own to give my place in there. No one helped me, no one supported me. All experts were against it. I started working with them on bringing them together to act in this play. And obviously they used to come, I remember the first steps where they used to come armed to the rehearsals. I used to search them, find razor blades under their tongues, knives in their pockets, guns. These people saw themselves at the end of the day as ideological and as enemies. But I will share one story that will explain everything and why me as a woman, although everyone told me you're going to have a lot of challenges and you won't succeed, actually the exact opposite happened. There was one young man who during the first weeks of rehearsal was extremely aggressive, staying on the side, always chanting, ISIS songs and messages on his phone to provoke. And then one day he comes and he tells me, well, I'm leaving. This is not for me. I'm leaving. And I told him, where are you going? And he told me, I'm leaving for Syria. And I said, what are you going to do in Syria? He told me, I'm going to join Al-Nusra Front. And I asked him why. He said, you won't understand. You're an infidel. And I said, well, try me. I want to understand why. And he started telling me about, the cause and quoting hadith and the Quran and how this is their duty, etc. And bit by bit, and then he tells me, and because at least there I can get a wife and I can get a job. And I ask him, well, why don't you do that here? And he tells me, because when I was born, my father was in prison, and therefore he couldn't register me, and I'm stateless because we passed the deadline. And so I told him, you know what? I understand what you're saying. Give me some time, please. Let me try and figure out what we can do. The same time, I figure out that someone else from the Alawite side was also stateless. And I come and I tell Atis, this young man, I tell him, you know what, I just want to connect you with this person because he has to be struggling the same, but he told me some things that could help you. And he sat with him. Fast forward 10 years. Atis is one of the main coordinators of the de-radicalization program that we run. He is the biggest influencer and the biggest advocate of peace today. He has a daughter named Leah, although I'm an infidel. And he is one of the people alongside hundreds of young men who today have more credibility than I can as a mediator to influence others and to drive the community. What I want to say is that this and many other stories taught me something very important. Conflict is emotional, it is not rational. Mm-hmm. And the problem that sometimes we miss is that the instigators of conflict, true, have all rational consideration that they use, needs for resources, money, etc. But even them, I've never seen one instigator of conflict who uses rational data, ideas, etc., to convince people into mobilizing for conflict. What they talk about is human dignity, is belonging, mm-hmm. is identity, mm-hmm. is all of this. Our problem in our approach as mediators is that we know this deep down, but we use processes, rationality, etc., in order to be able to solve conflict. So this cognitive dissonance is problematic. The difference is that women do not instigate conflict in general in our day and age or in history. Yeah. Anyway, in a majority, armed conflict. And therefore, when you come into an armed conflict filled with men, you are not perceived as a threat. You're not perceived as a rival. And therefore, the men show their emotions much more to women. Women can build trust much more. Mm-hmm. And for me, and out of my experience, trust is key. Building trust, not just with the different groups. If you do not build trust first with the mediator himself or with the peace builder, you cannot build trust with the different groups.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is how I'm going to.
Yeah, thank you for sharing these stories and shedding light on this. It's providing this open and safe space for expressing and going through the stories. And that takes me to Alain and the work that you do, because we know, why it's important, beyond, of course, achieving gender equality, but there are also some benefits that sometimes are not highlighted enough because perhaps there aren't too many success stories, but even those success stories and this evidence is not highlighted enough. So can you tell us a bit more about the benefits of having more women at the table?
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. And indeed, the story you just told is very similar to many stories we have in Geneva Call. If you allow me to go a little bit further than the Middle East, because listening to you, I was thinking of in Afghanistan, if there is one place where I would say in our engagement with armed groups and de facto authorities, the question of gender is the most archaic and the most difficult to tackle, that is Afghanistan. Sorry. During the 2 first years after the takeover by the Taliban, our director in Kabul was a woman. She got everything out of them of what was possible. For instance, freedom for women to continue working in the healthcare system, signed by the Taliban. For women in international organizations, including Geneva Call, who were working there, to continue working, opening spaces in madrasas for conferences that had nothing to do with, with strictly religious affairs. And once I was out there with her in a very tough meeting, dangerous meeting, with one of the most powerful people in today's Afghanistan. I was a bit afraid. I thought maybe we've gone too far. Maybe they will start threatening our staff in this country. And suddenly she managed, very humbly, she was just putting up a small veil, but very small, and pushing this guy. And meeting changed, and he agreed with what we were asking him to do. And then when we came back to the office in the evening, she showed me on her WhatsApp, she had received a picture from this guy of a bunch of flowers. So it's exactly what you said. I think there is a genius that we have, which is so complementary between genders, we have to recognize. Now in the Middle East, I think one of the, again, in Lebanon, our director for 6 years now is a woman, very strong, that works not only in Lebanon, but has been out for us for difficult negotiations in Libya, in other places of the Middle East. But I think there's, because she's Lebanese, sorry, I know you are from Jordanian origins, but when she speaks Arabic, everybody's listening to her as if she was singing. That's what some commanders of armed groups told me. So on top of her intelligence, I think the way she speaks Arabic was quite convincing. But another example in the Middle East that she started in Lebanon, actually, as you can imagine, the beginning of the war in Syria with all the armed groups there, all those who are affiliated or close to Al-Qaeda or Islamic State, these are extremely difficult nuts to crack, and we couldn't crack them. And our colleague had the idea to do seminars in international humanitarian law for the mothers of these commanders. And I was there for one of these first seminars. It has proved so efficient. The idea was to make sure that the mothers know that there is a law, there is a body of laws applicable in times of war. And often people don't know. You know, what you hear everywhere is that there is a war, there is no law.
Yeah.
And then we had these mothers being preoccupied about the fact that their sons, the commanders, could be seen as war criminals, and and the wives taking them to account at home. And that has proved extremely efficient with many of these commanders there. The last point, more global. Of course, in peace negotiations, there is a lot of international studies showing very clearly that if you don't have women around the table, the negotiation will collapse. And still, you see all these initiatives around with so few women around. And I will take the opportunity to commend the government of Colombia, but there things are changing quickly. So last time I was involved in that was 10 days ago. 10 days ago, still, if you took the 8 mesas de negociaciones, the negotiating tables, in all of them you had women, and not only one.
Not a token woman.
Exactly,
Yeah.
but that's the only place where you can say that I feel this has been taken seriously.
Thank you, Alain. And Sana, you do a lot of this work at CMI. And of course, you have the peace building and negotiations efforts at the government level, at the official level, and you have the informal sort of dialogue and initiatives, you know, at a local level. How can you bridge these two, and how can one complement the other?
Right, thank you. Well, I think we already had some references to the number of barriers that there still exist despite the Women, Peace and Security resolution and all the efforts to advance that. Barriers to women's inclusion in formal negotiations, both as negotiators or mediators, as well as participants or parties to the negotiation. And in this respect, informal dialogues and supportive mediation support efforts can play a critical role in kind of broadening the inclusion that is part of the whole ecosystem around mediation or transition efforts in a given country. And there, for example, at CMI, and I know in several peer organizations, there are activities that focus specifically on women, and this is really tapping into the kind of the willingness and the resources that are within these contexts, because in most conflict contexts, even if women are not around the mediation tables, they are very active within their communities, within their parties, within their kind of constituencies, whatever form that may take. And also they represent a huge diversity of views. So I think this perception perhaps sometimes that women automatically drive certain issues or have certain perspectives is very simplified. Women obviously come from diversity of backgrounds and also bring that wealth of views and recommendations and ideas to the table. And then sometimes the way that we have often worked is about finding those shared interests and trying to ensure that, especially when the mediation is quite narrow and exclusive, those views and interests are then kind of channeled to that. And sometimes they're not straightforward, clear on all the aspects of or on all the conflict issues, but on specific issues related to women's role. For example, in a transition, women's role in certain legal frameworks, their channels to the official process. There are very clear shared interests among the different stakeholders of women. So trying to kind of tap into that and ensure that those voices are heard, because as was already mentioned, it's a 50% of the population. And of course, there are women who are very influential within their parties as well, who might not be on the tables, who then connecting them to the broader community of active women in different sectors of society can also be helpful in bringing about advancement of the women's visibility and their voice in the process.
Thank you. Ambassador Kuret, you are a diplomat, a woman leader, so you have been part of various processes. How do you see the role of women advancing further? I mean, you're a role model to others, but how can you also play a role in encouraging others and ensuring that there's more representation? And how can that be reflected more globally?
Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me to this very, very much interesting event. Well, let me say, if we want to try to see how we can proceed in next few years, we have to reflect to what we have achieved. And this year and next year, it's a very good opportunity to reflect what we have achieved especially on the level of women, peace and security, because we are going to have to mark 25th anniversary of the resolution of the Security Council. Then, of course, we have to reflect to the general situation in the international community, where we are standing, both in policies and both in goals. So it is very important that the goals on gender equality, they are practically cross-cutting issue and policy in all international organizations. That gender equality is becoming not just a politically correct issue, but is becoming an issue that the stakeholders, we recognize it as an issue that has to become a state of mind, not just a policy, not just an issue. And with that, I believe that, of course, with synergies of different kind of policies in the international community, and especially by the efforts of the leading countries in the international community, we can advance the position of women, both in peacekeeping, both in peacemaking, both on mediation, in all other issues that are going to contribute to make this world a better place. Of course, we need a gender balance, not because we women are better and men are worse, or men are better and we are worse. No, because both genders, we bring something else to the table. Leah was talking about trust. In all international community, what we lack today? Why we have wars? Because of interests and because of lack of trust. And if we are able to bring more trust in different kind of situations, that might be our contribution. So Then in the written question, you so kindly asked me about the position of women in ICT and digitalization and the climate change. It's the same. Look at climate change negotiations. Most probably 20% of all scientists dealing with climate change are women. Indigenous women, it's proven that they are the best observers of climate change, especially in small island states and in Amazon region and so on, because they live with the nature and they are living observers of the climate changes. So I think all together, we have to bring to the table, whichever table, peace making, peacekeeping, solving wars, solving climate change, we have to bring the best of both of us. And this is going to be the best of humanity.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to get back to you, Dr. Scarpita, because you do a lot of this work through your organization. And so what are some of the strategies that you are employing and some initiatives that help elevate the role of women in fostering peace building?
Thank you very much for your question. In terms of strategies, I want to divide between sort of short-term, let's say today, but also long-term strategies. At UEC, we're working extensively to promote women leadership in all peace and security efforts. This include in traditionally male-dominated areas of the security, including women in the police, women in preventing and countering violent extremism, as well as working, of course, with peace builders and track one actors in peace processes. And promoting women leadership, I think it's essential if you want to really provide that kind of access to women. Like I said before, it's a question of power very often. So you need to promote women leadership. We are working extensively, secondly, with local grassroots organizations, because they do need, they are the one at the front line of peace building, and they do need sustainable financing. And third, one area where we are working extensively, including in the context of our relations with the Mediterranean, our Women Mediators Network. We have a well-established partnership with the Mediterranean Women Mediators Network. And networks of women are really important tools to be able to foster that kind of exchanges between women. There is so much expertise globally. And networks are spaces where women can share their experience, learn, but also identify best ways in which women can contribute in different contexts to peace. Looking more further, sort of long term, in terms of strategies, priorities, I think we all need to invest more in conflict prevention. A lot has been spent on war, not enough of peace. In peacemaking, and looking at conflict prevention is fundamental. So here, for us, investing in young women and investing in intergenerational exchanges, including through networks, is particularly important, because we really need to start investing in the next generation of peace builders or conflict resolution experts, including those who are very much active at the local level. Because today we have conflict, frozen conflict, frozen peace situations. And with all the open conflict that we have today, over 59, we really need to invest in conflict prevention more effectively. One other area that I wanted to mention, and Leah has already hinted to the work done with men. I think it's fundamental to also, when looking at promoting women inclusion in peace and mediation, to also look at how to engage with men for the promotion of gender equality. This is one fundamental area where we really need to have the buy-in of the men, whether it's in the negotiating table, to understand why it is important to have women at the table. Why do they have to bring women perspectives, gender equality when they're negotiating humanitarian access or prisoner exchanges or a peace agreement or post-conflict reconstruction and reconciliation? Women should be part of these discussions, and you need to have men support. It's not impossible, actually. We have very successful examples. You mentioned Colombia. This, I think, is one very good examples, but also Northern Ireland are very good examples of, you know, that you need a all societal approach, and men are a particularly important part to engage.
Thank you for highlighting that, and but also the importance of networks that always comes up in my conversations with women in especially the Middle East and North Africa region. Leah, you know, you are in the field, and there's a lot happening at the grassroots level, women-led, including your organization. How can they play a role, a lot of these women, in fostering resilience in the community, especially not just post-conflict, but as the conflict is raging?
Okay, I just want to address the idea first of fostering what we call resilience in general, because with what's happening in the Middle East and even around the world, I fear that all the drivers of what we call violent extremism are back in full force, and especially among the young and angry generation, or any form of extremism in an extremely polarized world. Because why? Amin Maalouf said it once in his book on identity. He said that when we all of us have multiple identities, every single one of us. The problem arises is that when one of these core identities feels threatened, it overtakes all our other identities. And that's what happens with radicalization and with extremism. It is the perceived threat towards one's identity. It is fear. Let's not underestimate the driver of fear. Hate between different communities or different countries. If you think about it, really, every single person says, you think they say, I hate the other, but actually what he's trying to say, the other person hates me. So there is this perception of threat. And today with what's happening, this perception of threat is the main driver of radicalization, the feeling of loss of belonging, of dignity, of where am I? Someone is trying to eliminate me. And so therefore, it is very important to make people feel safe again in their identities. And we are making people more and more afraid. We're doing the opposite. And I think that this is one of the first issues I want to tackle. Now, when it comes to women-led peace building, like you said, I don't really like the term women-led, because I do believe that it is not leading alone. It is leading with the men also that you work with.
Yeah.
And what happened with our program, for example, in Tripoli, which has a big center that already managed to reintegrate, reconcile, whatever we're going to call it, de-radicalize, or around 500 former fighters. But also the biggest challenge was for me that in this context, women are shunned from society. So they're not seen with men in public spaces. Their role was confined at home. And my challenge was, how am I going to do that? Include these women. And actually, I would have not been able to succeed if I hadn't convinced these men working with me, because of the trust that I built, that we need women with us. And today, we are the only space and the only center that has men and women working for their community alongside together. And I'm talking to you about people who were perceived and labeled as extremists.
Yeah.
They are the ones who bring
which reinforces Dr. Scarpita's point of
and reinforces, but it's the idea of giving ownership.
Ownership, yeah.
It's not, we're not here to lead, we're here to give ownership as well, and to share. It's a partnership. Even with mediators, it's a partnership.
Thank you. And we're very close to our time limits here. So Alain, you have talked about some of the work that Geneva Calls does, again, at the community level. If you can give us some examples where you see these successes taking fold beyond just the community level, like bringing it further to the local and national level.
Well, to the national level, in our case, it's difficult because our mission is really armed group. But what I would like to underline is that, what has been said up to now, the world of armed groups is a very, sorry for the word, but a very macho world, particularly in the Middle East. Everything you've just said about these young men who feel insecure in the modern world, hence they go back to what they believe is their religion, and they look all the time at the most archaic and the most conservative religious leaders. And there is an aspect in all these groups which is very much anti-gender equality. But you have exceptions, including in the Middle East. In Colombia, clearly, you take the big armed groups of Colombia, the ELN, these left wings, the FARC before, or los disidentes of the FARC today, they always had women. But in the Middle East, you go to northeast Syria, the SDF, so they went there, met with the top commander of the SDF. His number 2 in uniform with her gallants up here is a woman. And there is no question, you have women commanders in there everywhere, okay? But this is the exception in the area. So what we're trying to do at Geneva Call, of course, the 2 vice presidents of our board are very strong women, and they don't want us to encourage women to become fighters. But what we do with the 186 groups that we're engaging today in zones of conflict, we encourage them to put women in their political bodies. They often have a kind of central committee, a council or something, because, and we tell them it's not Western ideology, it's because where you have that, all your obligations towards children, towards education, towards healthcare will be looked after much better. And again, these are the result of studies and not the result of a Western ideology. And this is going in the right direction in most of the groups where we work with. So we heard since the beginning of this forum here in Rome, the description of a very somber world, and I think we are in a very somber world. But in our work on some issues like this, not with states, with non-state actors, we can see some pretty positive trends.
Yeah, well, we do need to look at these rays of hope and lift them up.
And they are down at the bottom.
Community level,
The community level.
And Sana, going back to some of your earlier points, of course, you were in an international organization, but you work with local actors. So how can you fortify that link? And again, not to be seen, as Alain said, as something that's coming from the West, but rather just empower the already, the great work that's already happening at the local level.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I do think that we kind of have to take a look at what's happening now, especially in the Mediterranean region as a major challenge to women, peace and security. And I don't think we should underestimate the challenge that is being posed in terms of perception to women's role in peace processes as a kind of Western-led norm. I think that's a challenge and an argument that is often presented, not to say that it has any validity, but it's out there. And I do feel that at the very moment now, because there is so much polarization, so much division, also in many ways, the UN system where the WPS stems from and originates from is on the retreat in terms of its mediation role, in terms of its ability to effectively mediate comprehensive peace bargains and processes and transition processes. So I think there really needs to be a kind of a new look at how this is being negotiated in these kind of hybrid models that we have at the moment on mediation. What is being mediated is at the moment is more about conflict mitigation. It's about ceasefires. It's about specific, very narrow and constrained deals. How do you involve women there? It's not always straightforward. It's much easier to block women's involvement from such processes than from comprehensive transition or national dialogue processes where it's more natural in a way for women to be involved. So I think here we need to look at who is doing the mediation and how those actors are agreeing on how women's inclusion is being brought. And I think that requires a lot of work. What are kind of the arguments for bringing in the women? Because it's also normative, but it's not normative for everyone. So how do you have that conversation among the mediators? Because at the end of the day, if you want to have effective women's inclusion and effective mediation processes, you need to have alignment at the international, at the national, and then at the local level. At the local level, it's easier when you have alignment at the national and international levels. So I'll leave it there. I know we're running out of time.
Thank you. And last but not least, the last word goes to you, Ambassador. You are from a small but mighty country, and your country can play a very important role in encouraging more women's participation in a lot of these processes, particularly on peace building. How can your country leverage their influential role within the EU, but also on the global stage?
Thank you. Well, I call my country a compact country. It sounds better than small. Although small is beautiful. Let me say that when it comes to the empowerment of women, we have excellent results. Right now, we have elected president, a woman. We have a Speaker of the House, Minister of Foreign Affairs. We used to have the first military commander in NATO. That was a woman. But what is more important is that the empowerment of women in Slovenia has a very good record. And out of this internal situation, we are able to project the strength on the international arena. Of course, gender equality and empowerment of women, peace and security is a mainstream in our foreign policy, and especially is a mainstreaming right now when we are elected member of the Security Council this year and next year. We signed the pledge of Antonio Guterres for the inclusion of women in the peace processes. So we are trying to cooperate also in all levels, OSCE, OECD, if you want, UN, on all levels to really mainstream this. We had some very good results that are not completely connected with women and gender equality, but it has to do with education. We were running for 3 years the mediation in schools in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And that proved to be very successful, but unfortunately, international donors, they lost the interest to do that. It was most probably not enough sexy to sell. So this is something that I think every country, if regardless of the size, if it has internal, if it can contribute on the basis not just of sweet talk, but on the basis of internal situation, that could contribute. And I'm wearing orange today. Why I'm wearing orange? Most probably you all know. Yesterday, it was the International Day to stop violence against women and girls. And of course, it's also 16 days campaign to stop violence. So I'm sure that also message from this forum should be to stop violence against women and girls. Thank you.
Thank you so much for highlighting this important message. And thanks to all of you for, first of all, the work that you do, for sharing your expertise. And I can promise you, we only started to scratch the surface. So I hope we can continue this conversation in various fora. And thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.